member or young person themselves. Obviously, if you're really concerned that a young person's hurt themselves and they need medical attention, then you would take them to A&E or call an ambulance. But you can also speak to kind of school to think about support, or visit your GP if there isn't that kind of imminent urgent worry. So that's all in the chat there for you, just in case you want to kind of save that or you can't. Hope for the webinar this evening is to give you lots of hopefully practical things to take away, but to give you kind of overview of self-harm, what we mean by it, the ways in which someone might self-harm, and also importantly to think about the reasons behind why someone might self-harm. To also understand what is meant by emotion regulation and how to support your teen to kind of regulate their emotions. That is an ongoing skill that we all kind of develop. We did another one of these webinars last week, and lots of parents were talking about anger, even when their young person gets very distressed and that turns into anger or aggression, how to kind of respond in those moments. We have got more of a focus on self-harm, but I still think a lot of the things we talk about will apply. So as well as thinking about that, we hope to give you some practical takeaways and strategies to support your teen who might be struggling with self-harm, and to signpost you to kind of other services and resources if you feel that might be helpful, or your teen is saying they'd be open to support. Like I said, it is a sensitive topic, so we do like to say, you know, consider your own well-being. Like I say, it can be really distressing if someone you really care about, your child, is struggling with something so much. It can affect you. You might know of other people affected by issues related to this. You might even have personal experience. So yeah, do take it easy, take breaks. I don't know, have a cup of tea or a snack, or and maybe doing something nice at the end of the call, just to reorientate yourself back into normal evening life, whatever that looks like for you. And yeah, like we say, we will have a kind of portion at the end to see if people do have any questions or things that you're left with. So let's go on then to explore self-harm, what it is and what we know about self-harm, and some of the statistics and how kind of common it is. So a definition of self-harm taken from the charity Mind is when someone hurts themselves as a way of dealing with very difficult feelings, painful memories, or overwhelming situations and experiences. We kind of define it as when someone intentionally damages or kind of injures their body in some way. And often they don't have an intent of ending their life, but they do have an intent of kind of harming themselves in some way. And often self-harm is actually a way of coping with really difficult feelings, like they're actually wanting to get through something. There is some link to show that people who self-harm might be more likely to have thoughts of suicide or kind of suicidal ideation. So we might want to hold that in mind. But often lots of young people will share that actually self-harm helps them cope with difficult feelings. It can be quite common in kind of younger age. So again, I think there's some statistics on the slides here. About 18%, this was taken from, I can't quite see that date there. I think it's slightly outdated, but I think I was having a quick look before we joined. I think the statistics are around about the same, but about 18% of students aged 12 to 17 reported self-harming at some point in their life. The UK has quite a high rate of self-harm compared to other countries in Europe. Self-harming is more common in females, so we do tend to see that more in girls. But then I also think it's important to remember that rates of suicide are much higher in males. So I guess both genders can be vulnerable. Yeah, we want to kind of hold vulnerability or kind of safety in mind, regardless of sex and gender. But yeah, it does happen. It is an experience. It is something that young people can sometimes try out, and then they might not go on to self-harm for long periods, or self-harm can kind of be present for some time, depending on how that kind of stress fluctuates. But yeah, just to kind of set the scene, I think can be, whilst obviously no one wants their child to self-harm, I think it can be helpful to acknowledge that it does happen, and sometimes people need support with that. So different forms of self-harm, what it can kind of look like. I guess the most common one people go to first is kind of some form of cutting themselves, using a sharp object. Different objects might be used, like sharpeners or like razor blades, or even like sharp pencils, or scratching or kind of picking at the skin. But other forms of self-harm can show as like head banging or biting yourself, or pulling hair, even like hitting or punching walls, and then they kind of get an injury. There's different ways that it can kind of show, and again, it's helpful to be aware of that. It's not just about cutting, there are different forms. And then also kind of other risk-taking behaviours that can have an impact on the body. Young people might misuse drugs or alcohol, and that has an impact. And again, that might be a way of coping with difficult feelings. They might over-exercise, and again, that can have kind of impact on their body and not be good for them. They might even initiate physical fights as a way of kind of experiencing that pain, which kind of matches the emotional intensity of how they're feeling. Or yeah, they kind of just engage in something where they're putting themselves at risk. That might be unsafe relationships or unsafe sex. So again, I guess it's thinking about a young person's safety, and that can look different for different kind of young people. I think sometimes I guess it's interesting as well. Perhaps for boys, it might be more socially acceptable. There's some like cultural influence on perhaps being more getting into fights, or that kind of anger, or that externalizing of feelings, whereas perhaps for girls, socially or culturally, there's more of this like internalizing of it. So it's like the distress is internalized, they cope with it by hurting themselves more, as opposed to it kind of going out for others. But again, that's not always the case. So the first thing that we like to kind of, that's a bit of an introduction to kind of what we're thinking or talking about this evening. But the first thing we like to say before we jump to what to do about it is to really try and be curious that whatever behavior you are seeing, or whatever behavior kind of made you sign up and click into this webinar this evening, is to think about what's beneath the surface. So the behavior is what we can see, what the young person is kind of presenting to us with, but thinking about what's kind of beneath that is really, really important, because a young person might be being aggressive or might be self-harming, and that looks the same on the surface, but the reason kind of underneath that behavior could be very different for very different young people. So maybe one young person is really struggling with friendship issues at school, or is feeling bullied and isolated, and the self-harm is a way of coping with that. Another young person could be really tough on themselves about academic achievements, and they think they're not doing good enough, or they're really stressed or overwhelmed by exams and school, and again, self-harm's a way of coping with that. So even though the behavior on the surface is the same, self-harm or anger or whatever it might be, the reason underneath that behavior is different, and that's so key, because in those two examples, our intervention or how we might try and help those young people would be very different. I wouldn't be giving revision advice to someone who's really struggling with friendship issues, and kind of vice versa. And obviously, when the behavior is quite concerning or shocking or upsetting, we can be really pulled to just trying to fix or change the behavior without trying to kind of take pause to think about what's going on underneath. So yeah, you might have, it's called the iceberg analogy of kind of behavior. And I would say this goes for all behavior with teenagers and kind of humans. You know, we can never assume we know what's going on in their mind, and it's good to try and be curious, or just take pause to think about what might be going on underneath. And so again, there's different kind of like examples here of different things that might be causing the kind of self-harm or thing that we're concerned about. And I guess we might say this a lot throughout this intervention, there is it can be hard to get information out of teenagers. Like they don't, it's like getting blood from a stone. Perhaps, you really try to ask questions or understand, but they might be quite closed or secretive, or struggle to open up. But again, I think young people can feel quite vulnerable or exposed, or they don't want to make their parents worry, or they're worried that they might be angry, and they feel like they need to kind of hold it all in, or they don't want other people knowing. So it's about trying to do it, persevere with it, but do it in a kind of gentle way, where we know it might take time. I did a workshop at one of the schools that I'm in the other week, and a parent said, I asked my son some questions like 2 weeks ago, and then only like recently has he opened up a bit more. And she was saying, I really think I did plant some seeds, and it reminded me I do need to be patient. And then, so I guess there's different ways that people might find out about self-harm as a parent. You might, your child might tell you, but I guess also quite commonly, or like what we like to kind of normalize, is sometimes a child might tell a friend, and then a friend might tell school or another parent, or teachers might notice a child's really distressed, and then they kind of let something out. You might see kind of marks on your child's body, or bruises or cuts or things that you're not sure how they got them, and then your kind of concerns might be raised. There's lots of different ways that you might find out, and again, like often there is quite a lot of guilt and shame or worry about sharing. So again, it can sometimes feel, I think, for parents like almost offensive perhaps, or like, how can you not tell me that you're struggling this much? But that does happen. It is quite common, and often I think young people don't want to worry parents, or know that you've perhaps got stuff going on, so it is common that they might not disclose that to you directly. Hand over to Catalina for this next bit.
Perfect. So we're going to be talking about emotional regulation, and this is really important because, like Ellen was telling us, a lot of these emotions we can't see, but emotional regulation in particular is about being able to recognize what those emotions are in the first place, notice them, name them, and then be able to share them and then respond to them in the appropriate way. But again, if children and young people do not have that developed, or are still learning to do that, is going to be very hard for parents and for adults to be able to understand what is happening underneath the iceberg. So again, emotional regulation is not about repressing those really strong emotions, but it's about being able to name them, notice them, and deal with them in a healthier way. So for example, you still want a child to feel the anger, you want the child to feel the frustration, maybe anxiety, maybe a sadness, but you want them to be able to, once they name it, you want them to be able to respond to it in a way that is not harmful and safe to themselves or to other people as well. But we need to remember that this is a skill that we are not born with. Even, in our 20s, that part of our brain is still developing, is still learning. So this is why with young people in particular, it can be quite confusing sometimes when those emotions are very big, when we're not sure, maybe it becomes quite unpredictable. But again, the young person is still learning to name them, to notice it, to differentiate, am I angry, am I stressed, am I upset, am I frustrated? So as we talk about self-harm, we are going to talk about how do we support a child with building that confidence and emotional regulation, and how do we also make sure that we're not just seeing the behavior like has been mentioned, but also seeing what might be under that behavior. So something that's really important is to remember as well, for young people, they might not have that language, like I was saying, they might not be able to describe it, they might not be able to link the dots. I had a really stressful day at school, and now I'm feeling this really strong emotions, and this is why I am finding it really hard to manage right now. They might not always be able to connect feelings with cause. And again, it might just be that for parents, this can be very, very unpredictable. So if we go to the next slide, how does this link to self-harm? So we know that for young people, these emotions can be particularly strong. So during adolescence, there's so much change, not just physically, but also socially. So these emotions can be very, very strong. But if these are hidden, and the child doesn't know how to express them or notice them, they're very likely to be built up. And if they're built up and hidden, it also means that people around them are not responding how they want them to respond. And again, it's really frustrating for the young person who's feeling these really strong emotions, doesn't know how to communicate them, and is now finding a way to cope with them. So when young people have these feelings that have really built up, they're more likely to engage in unsafe strategies like self-harm. So as Ellen was saying, it's really important to understand that for young people, they might self-harm for many different reasons. So for young people, it might be a way of, once they've recognized all that tension in the bodies and once they've recognized all those feelings, it might be a way to try to get rid of that tension that they're experiencing. For other people who maybe are feeling that lack of control, they want to regain some control through that behavior. For other people, they might find a way to make whatever they're feeling inside more external. So how do I express this anger or this sadness, this frustration? And it might be a way to really be able to express it. And for other young people, they do tend to share that. It might be a way of, how do I focus my attention on something else? If I don't want to focus on the physical emotions I'm feeling, let me focus my attention on the pain. Let me focus my attention on what's going on around me through self-harm. So again, there are many reasons why a young people might engage with it. And again, if the emotional regulation and the ability for a child to express it is tricky, then again, for parents, it's going to feel very confusing as well. So yeah, before we go into the next bit, again, I do want to remind though that again, emotional regulation is more about helping them to notice it and name it, and not just hide it and suppress it even further.
So generally, when people kind of experience really intense emotion, there's a bit of an escalation kind of cycle. So I guess in terms of thinking about how to help your teen when we've kind of thought about the cycle of how things can escalate and thought about what you might do when. So we're going to kind of start with when you're noticing that kind of acceleration or that agitation in your teenagers. And again, it can be helpful to kind of think, oh yeah, wait, things are bubbling up, I can feel it, and where you're at on this kind of, because it can happen quite quickly, or you can cycle through it kind of quite quickly. But when things are accelerating and building up, what our advice would be to kind of think about what your kind of statements are. So you might again be feeling quite anxious, nervous, stressed about what might happen, and sometimes that can come out in stress onto your kind of child, that can sometimes add kind of fuel to the fire or the kind of distress. But concerning statements that you might hear from your child, what that might look like when things are escalating is, oh, I hate my life, it's all really rubbish, I just give up, there's no point, I want to die, or I might as well not be here, I can't do it, you don't love me, everybody hates me, like really quite extreme thinking, like everything's awful, everyone hates me, there's no point in anything, and they can be really powerful, worrying statements for you to kind of hear as parents, and it's understandable if that makes you feel kind of quite concerned. But I guess next we're thinking about what our advice would be about how to respond to these kind of comments, and because I think sometimes it can feel quite difficult to know what to say. So sometimes parents or adults tend to kind of respond to those statements by saying, like, come on, that's not right, I love you so much, or you've got loads of friends, what do you mean, life's good or life's okay. Or you might go in with lots of questions which perhaps make them shut down or adds to this distress, or like Catalina was saying, perhaps they haven't got the words for their emotions, so they don't even know how to explain it, or how to kind of verbalize it. We might try and persuade, like, wait, but you did so good the other week, you haven't always felt this way, think of all the positive things that we've got coming up, or someone else has been through this and this is what helps them perhaps. And again, that comes from a really good place of trying to kind of hold the hope, or we might give practical advice of, like, what, you just need to advise more, you just need to spend less time gaming and sleep better. And you're probably not wrong that those things would be helpful, but sometimes when a child's in that agitated, things are building up mode, that can just add to their feeling of like no one gets it, or it can make them kind of more distressed. So what we would advise instead of, so if you do say these comments, I think I just want to normalize, like, it's totally understandable, and we kind of all do it, but sometimes they can be unhelpful. So we want to give you some alternative things to try that can help diffuse or set up a slightly different conversation. So we talk about the acronym of WINS. So that stands for wonder, imagine, notice, and sounds. So instead of trying to kind of fix the situation or make them think positively or pull them out of their slump or their anger, instead you're trying to just be curious. And again, this kind of links back to that iceberg analogy. You're trying to just kind of get beneath the surface a little bit, and not necessarily fix or problem solve or tell them kind of what to do. So that might look like, oh, I wonder if you've had a really difficult day because things seem quite tense, or think you seem a little off this evening. Is that right? Like, do you want to chat? I'm here. But you're just being curious, again, in a kind of like tentative way, but you're showing you're open to have the conversation. Or perhaps if you know something has gone wrong, or I don't know, you have told them to get off their game, or whatever the situation might be, or they have got bad test results. I can imagine, I know how much that means to you. I can imagine you're having some difficult feelings now, or this kind of feels really heavy. Is that right? You're just kind of reflecting what you're seeing back to them. Or I notice that it seems hard to talk sometimes. Is there anything that would help with that? Maybe it's not helpful for me to keep asking questions, but again, I'm here. Or shall we just go for a walk with the dog and just spend a bit of time, or get out of the house together? Or that sounds very hard. And I think kind of, so back to what Catalina was saying about emotion regulation, often when we're very stressed, we kind of can't see the wood for the trees. So we're just in our emotions and we can't name them, or we're not in that rational place where we can kind of think things through. So it can be helpful to have someone who, in an empathic but kind of containing way, is just being curious about, what's happened here? Something's up. Is this how you're feeling? Is that not right? Giving them the language, or showing them that sometimes it's not obvious, and perhaps, we just need to explore that or unpick that a bit. So that can be helpful to help have those words. But also, something we talk a lot about in our service is this idea of connection before correction. So often when your child's really struggling, it's really natural that you want to fix it or correct it, or kind of get rid of that distress and make everything better. And so again, that comes from a well-meaning place. But if you jump in and do that too quickly, often it can have the opposite effect. So with this, I always like to give the example. If you've had a stressful day for whatever reason, and you land home and your partner, husband, wife, roommate, or parent, whatever, kind of says, oh, do you know what, Ellen, you've had a really stressful day, but what you need to do is you need to speak to your boss, make a to-do list, and just like prioritize your time better. If someone jumps straight to that kind of correction, I don't know about you, but that would likely make me more annoyed or more stressed. And the advice doesn't land on me well, versus if I'm stressed, upset about something, and I land home and someone says, oh gosh, I can see something's up. Tell me about your day. Can I make you a cup of tea? What happened? How are you feeling? Gosh, I might feel like this in that situation. Is that how you feel? And they connect with me first, and then they might offer me some suggestions of what might be helpful. I'm much more open to it if I feel like they've taken the time to kind of listen to me. And also what can happen is, if we do this connection bit first, is sometimes people can come up with their own suggestions themselves about what might help. Like, okay, maybe I do need to get an early night tonight, or maybe I shouldn't spend as much time on my console. And that can be so much more powerful if they come up with suggestions themselves, as opposed to us feeling like we've got to kind of give them. So yeah, that idea of connection before correction, if you would just take that this evening, I'd be happy with that, because it can just set up that dance very differently in the kind of conversation. And then, I guess on this slide, just so this is what we talk about emotion validation, remembering that, what's that statistic, that 80% of communication is non-verbal. So it's not just what you say, it's kind of how you say it. where you say it, the kind of tone of how you speak, so just being mindful of that, your body language, your kind of your tone of voice, the pace at which you're speaking. I do think as well, like a lot of parents say with teenagers, because they sometimes aren't the most open, where you have the conversations. If they've just landed back from school and you're, I don't know, in the kitchen firing off lots of questions, that's often not the best time, and often they speak a bit more perhaps later in the night. Or lots of parents say, yeah, my kid speaks to me most when I'm driving them to school, or when we're on the bus, or we're walking together. And that's because it's not so intense. It's not that direct face-to-face conversation where they feel like put on the spot, perhaps. So again, we just encourage you to be mindful of that, and encourage you to reflect, when do you get the most from your child? When do they open up more? And what helps facilitate that?
Perfect. So now we're going to be thinking about when the young person is at that peak stage. And this is when things are probably feeling like they're bubbling over, it's feeling quite overwhelming. And really importantly, at this point, it's quite hard for a young person to think quite clearly. And this is when the young person is more likely to either self-harm or to start experiencing those urges to self-harm. And before I do introduce strategies so that when a young person, if they do get to this stage, they can cope in a healthy and safer way, we do need to remember that any of these skills that I'm going to talk about, they can't be taught when a young person is at peak. It's really, really unlikely that you're going to be able to take any new information. And one example that I like to use is a bit like teaching someone how to swim whilst they're drowning. You can't teach them strategies or something new when they're in that survival, when they are in that overwhelmed mode. So it's really important that if any of the strategies you think would be helpful to really introduce to them, or to role model to them, or to talk about, make sure that they are practiced and they are thought about and planned carefully before or after. But ideally, obviously, if that's the only choice, that's fine, but ideally not during that time where it's going to be very, very hard for someone to take information. But also for the parent's going to be also quite likely in that drive mode, in that alertness mode. So again, trying to teach a skill to someone during that much overwhelm is going to be very, very difficult. So if we go to the next page, so one of the strategies that we use, they are called TIP skills. So we're going to be thinking about using our bodies to help to feel more calm, and also to help to regulate and to help to find a way to calm down those really, really strong, both physical and emotion intense sensations. So again, we need to remember that when a young person goes into that peak stage, they're going to be a survival mode. The body is going to be responding very strongly. The blood is going to be rushing all over. The heart's going to be beating fast. They're going to be breathing really, really fast, or shallow breathing, hot, tense, agitated. And you can see how that also mirrors with the anger, right? The body is going to be working really, really, really hard. So what we're going to do with the strategies is we're trying to regulate those physical sensations. We're almost tricking the brain to say, actually, you don't need to be in overdrive right now. You can calm down, you can be grounded. So the first strategy is using temperature. So the T stands for temperature, and is how do I cool my body in order to activate a nerve of my body that is going to slow down my heart rate. And how do I do that in a way, again, that feels safe and feels comfortable for the young person? So when we change that really, so again, when someone's in that peak, it's very likely that they'll describe, I feel really hot, I feel like I feel sweaty, I feel really overwhelmed. It's a way of changing that temperature to calm down faster. So there are many ways to do this. One of the more common ways is to maybe use ice packs. It could be, I know some young people would use maybe more like vegetables, like frozen vegetables or frozen fruit, if that's the only thing that's available. Other kids might just find a Ziploc bag and fill it with water, put it on the ice and on the cheeks. But I know other young people might find it more practical to splash cold water. And again, when you do introduce this strategies, make sure that there's a few variety. If a young person is more likely to self-harm at nighttime, maybe taking a freezing shower is not appropriate to do right before bed. So are there any other options, like splashing cold water or like using an ice pack? And then if we go to the next one, So with temperature, we both with temperature and intense exercise, because we are really shocking the body, because we are making a sudden change to our bodies, we do need to also be aware that if the child or the young person does have any medical conditions where maybe changing body temperature that strongly, or maybe doing intense exercise cannot be helpful, is really important, because we know obviously cold exposure can make your blood pressure drop, and exercise can obviously raise your blood pressure. So if that's something that the young person's already prone to, it's important to be aware. But again, this is why it's good to look at different options, what will work better for your young person. So then the I stands for intense exercise, and I've used this a lot with young people. So again, whilst your body is working really hard, how do we engage the child in really strong physical exercise to release everything that, release that tension, to release that excess energy? Some young people like jumping on the spot. It might be walking really fast, pacing up and down. It might be skipping the rope. And again, sometimes this works well when the young person's starting to notice the urges. If they're starting to notice that the body is in the overdrive, the exercise not only changes your body, but also it can at times serve as a distraction. How do I focus all my attention? And exercise is draining, and it can be quite intense. So we do see that sometimes when young people do engage in these activities, naturally the attention will also focus and shift a little bit. So we've done temperature, we've done intense exercise. Then when we move to the next one is paced breathing. So again, remembering that when a child is at peak, they are in overdrive mode, the same fight-flight response that you would respond when you're anxious or when you think you're in danger. So again, your heart is going to be beating really fast and your breathing is likely going to be shallow. So again, how do I send a message to my brain that I am safe and that I can breathe a bit more calmly, and that I can release these emotions in a safer way? So we find that when a young person starts to breathe really, really heavily, it's very common to start breathing through your mouth, like really intensely, or hyperventilating. And one way to slow down your pace is to do the 5 and 7 breathing. So again, breathing through your nose and then breathing out for 7 seconds. Again, with these strategies, we need to be very clear to the young person. This is not going to fix the urges to self-harm. This is not going to fix the strong emotions that you feel, but it is helping your body in that moment to feel safer. And there's loads of different ways to change the breathing. One that I really like to do is using the hands. So through the nose, breathing up, down, up, down. And the reason I say to practice these is in the moment, I sometimes forget, was it 5, was it 1, was it up? I can't remember what to do. So again, with the young person, finding a strategy. Is it that they want to use a visual to remember how long to breathe out for? Is it that they want to use an analogy? Or is it just that they are going to remember to breathe through the nose intensely and then to breathe out through the mouth? And then we go to the next one, which is progressive muscle relaxation. So again, how do we help to release that anxiety, that extra stress, those strong feelings that the young person is probably experiencing that can be quite overwhelming? And one way to do it is by really tensing those parts of the body where the young person, so if they say, when I'm feeling those urges or when I'm really overwhelmed, I just notice so much tension in my body. So then you encourage them to use that tension, hold it for 5 seconds. So I might really push up my shoulders for 5 seconds and then drop it. I might be able to do it with my hands, 5 seconds really hard, and then let it go. And you can do that with every single part of your body. And again, it's a way to show your body and your brain, I am safe, I am grounded, and I'm just trying to release that extra adrenaline that is going through my body. And then finally, we do have grounding strategies. And when I work with young people that are self-harming, they often do share that in that moment, the brain is going so fast, they feel very ungrounded, they feel really unaware, everything's going really fast. And grounding techniques is a way to come back to the moment, to be aware of your surroundings, to use all your senses as much as you can. And again, sometimes children do say, actually, I start doing it just because I want to keep calm and in the moment, but I do get distracted by it sometimes. So one of the more common ones is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's getting the young person to look at 5 things they can see, 4 things they can touch, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Again, when someone's that overwhelmed, they probably won't remember all those steps. So it's about working out with them which ones help them to ground. Could you do 1 of each? So 1 with my eyes, 1 with my nose, 1 with my mouth, 1 with my hands. Or could I just look around 5 things that are yellow, 5 things that are red? But again, what you're doing is you're helping the young person to be aware, to ground by being more aware of the surroundings. It can be quite disorientating and scary when a young person is at peak.
Thanks, Catalina. And just to add to that, I guess I was just thinking, like, so these are kind of, we know that these things help when the nervous system, when someone's in that panic, really distressed state, we're trying to help the body calm down so that the mind can kind of catch up. So sometimes when a young person is really struggling with, like, I'm just so distressed, I feel like I need to self-harm or hurt myself, some young people said, like, I want practical things that will give me that same intense feeling that's just a bit safer. These are the kind of other options. But I was also thinking, perhaps if a child's very distressed in an angry way, it's not that they're kind of self-harming. Again, I think all of this is about the delivery. I wouldn't be saying to them, go and get some ice cubes from the fridge when they're kind of angry. You know, again, I think it would be that the importance of that connection of like, whoa, okay, I can see you're really angry, but you can still take these things. So for temperature, be like, let's just go sit outside, or let's have this chat in the garden if you've got a garden, or even if it's just cracking the window open, or like, let's just get especially in this heat, let's just get a glass of water, a cold drink, and sit down and chat this through. You can bring that temperature in yourself, but not where you're kind of asking the young person to do it. Or, you know, let's talk about this after you've done football or after you've gone out with your mates. So again, they're getting that exercise to get it out of their body. Or when someone's really distressed, you know, instead of saying you just need to take a few deep breaths, you might be saying to them, just breathe with me a minute. Let's just slow down. When you can see they can't even get their words out because they're hyperventilating, you can help scaffold some of these tip skills, not just put it on the young person to practice or kind of pull out. And yeah, I always like to say I never ever remember the 5 senses. And I definitely sometimes, again, when a young person is just spiraling and they're kind of thinking about the future and all these awful things, I might just be like, I just want to bring you back into the room. Like, what color are your shoes? What color are my shoes? How many colors can you see in this room? And that's that kind of grounding to pull them out of that kind of whirlwind about worrying about the future or going over difficult things in the past. Great. So the escalation cycle, so we've thought a bit about the build up, how we want to do that connection before correction, not just giving them the solutions, about in that peak moment of distress, how to help calm the body down with those tip skills, either encouraging them to use them or scaffolding them yourself or trying to do them with the young person. What do we do kind of after a young person's hurt themselves or after there's been a big incident? So in the immediate kind of aftermath of an incident like that, particularly self-harm, I guess we are mindful about their kind of safety. So if your young person does have a significant wound, often we talk about superficial wounds, which is like scratches perhaps, or a small break in the skin that we could quite easily put some Germaline on or wipe clean and then put a plaster on and it's okay, then that can kind of be managed at home. And then so we think about that immediate safety, cleaning the wound, and then perhaps having a conversation about what happened when they feel ready. Perhaps it's just some TLC in time. But if there is a significant wound or you're worried your child's taken paracetamol or overdosed or something, obviously in that moment it would be important to get kind of immediate physical health care, either by attending A&E or asking for an urgent GP appointment or calling 999 if they're kind of you couldn't get there yourself safely. And some other advice is if the wound's you're not concerned about it, we wouldn't advise spending too much time or focus on it. Instead, you know, just listen and again kind of try to get try not to get too caught up in the behavior and be like, whoa, what's gone on? Not like, oh my gosh, you've self-harmed. You know, like, what's been happening? Something must be really difficult for you. Can we talk about it? Encourage them to kind of look after it and prevent an infection. Also, we do advise to parents, I guess, and again, I think it's good to do this sensitively with a child. Like, I really get that you're struggling and you need some help with this, and I'm glad we know, and we want to support you, but just to keep you safe and to, you know, stop you from hurting yourself again, or reduce the urge, sometimes it can be helpful to kind of do a bit of a sweep of their room and just remove any objects that they might use to hurt themselves, or any sharp objects, just so that kind of temptation isn't as easy for them to kind of access. That can be a really one of the most helpful ways of actually kind of reducing the urges, or helping young people manage those urges in another way. And then we would advise, again, not in a way where they're like, they feel like you're helicopter parenting them, but we would advise keeping a close eye on them, checking in with them, especially if they're still in that kind of high state of regulation, and kind of, sorry, high state of distress, and trying to kind of scaffold them to do things to bring them down from that, which we've kind of talked about. And again, you know, you're coming here for tips this evening, but you will know your young person well. Like, when do you see them most content or relaxed, or what are they most interested in? And when someone's in that state of distress, they struggle to kind of engage with those things that are good for them, but you might help set that up for them. And then again, on this slide, we've got those kind of crisis line numbers if you feel like you're not quite sure, you want to get some advice, depending on the situation, they're there for you too. Sometimes people do prefer speaking, but, you know, obviously Childline is something that's used, and it's an independent person that's a bit easier for them to speak to. That's an avenue of support. Or again, sometimes in families, your parents recognize that maybe it's quite hard to speak to me, or you're worried about how I'm going to react. You know, is there an auntie or an older cousin or someone that in the family that they might have a different conversation with, or they might be up for calling or speaking to? It's good to think kind of more widely as well sometimes.
Perfect.
That's you. Sorry, Kathleen.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, and then we're going to be talking now more about after. So when we are more going towards the recovery stage, or maybe once we are noticed that the young person is more calm, it is important to put a plan into place. And Ellen's already mentioned a bit of it, but this is when the young person is going to be more able to problem solve, but also parents are going to be more able to problem solve. So should we go for the next bit? It's just really important that after a crisis, the young person is going to most likely be feeling a lot of low mood, maybe some shame, maybe some guilt, regret, a lot of criticism. And it's important to know that as we're going to be thinking about safety planning, there's different needs that the young person is going to have in that moment. So for some young people, it might be they might need space, they might need comfort, a bit more of that validation that Ellen's already talked about. But again, at this point, we're not just problem solving. It's most likely that at this place, we're just trying to get the young person to feel safe again, to feel that they are grounded, and to feel like they are more able to calm down in the moment. Yeah. Did you have anything else, Ellen? No? Perfect. So now that we are at the recovery stage, again, it's really important to do a safety plan. We might call it a safety plan, but it could also be a relapse prevention plan, or a way to prevent it for next time. But it's really important that if you can, you do this together. The more collaborative it is, it tends to be a bit more successful. But we also know that there are times that parents will need to take control of the situation, especially if it's still feeling quite unsafe, and to make sure that if the young person reaches that peak again, that we're going to help them keep safe. So for example, there will be situations where you might need to limit the access to things that they could hurt themselves. So Ellen's already mentioned things like restricting access to sharpeners, to razor blades, depending on what you know your young person is likely to use or has used in the past. But it's really important because, again, we keep on going back to the emotions under this. So if there's already shame, if there's already guilt, if there's already anger, we need to make sure that when we do this with transparency, we do it with care, but we can still keep those boundaries. So for example, if I was to remove things like razor blades, it's not just that I'm going to be like removing them and not explaining what's going on, or I'm going to say, I'm going to remove this because I don't trust you with this. No, it's acknowledging, look, I will need to remove this for now. And because it seems like it's quite unsafe at the moment, it's not because I don't trust you. It's because I can see you're struggling. I can see things are really difficult, and I want to help you to keep you safe. So again, by removing and by restricting this access to these things, what we are doing is we're creating a pause after that big, overwhelm. And by creating that delay, when a young person is in that peak stage, we know already that they're likely to act on impulse. We know that the brain is going really fast. So if these things are less accessible to them, we are creating a bit of distance, and we are helping them to keep safe. And again, if these are restrictions that you're putting into place, it's important to make sure you do check in with them, make sure that when it does feel safe,